This is the EWN Podcast Network.
Welcome to Late Boomers, our podcast guide to creating your third act with style, power, and impact. Hi, I'm Kathy Worthington.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Join us as we bring you conversations with successful entrepreneurs, entertainers, and people with vision who are making a difference in the world.
Everyone has a story, and we'll take you along for the ride on each interview, recounting the journey our guests have taken to get where they are, inspiring you to create your own path to success. Let's get started. Hello, I'm Kathy Worthington. Welcome to Late Boomers. Today we are featuring the inimitable Australian kitesurfing and snowkiting champion Jennie Milton, also known as AdrenaJen. She has been snowkiting for over 20 years and passionately promotes extreme sports, and she coaches others through her International Snowkite Academy to excel and embrace the thrill of adventure.
And I'm Mary Elkins. Jennie is a certified kite instructor and backcountry guide, ski instructor, nerdy gear tech, as she calls herself, and motivational speaker. She has great stories of resilience and stories about dealing with fear she likes to tell, like her terrifying escape from a charging polar bear or surviving an avalanche.
A polar bear?
Did I say polar bear? What did I say?
Good.
A definite polar bear. And surviving, and also her competitive kite surfing that she did at age 48 after having major surgery. We're looking forward to hearing about them and about life in the world of extreme sports. Welcome, Jennie.
Thank you so much, Kathy and Mary, for having me on your podcast today. I'm excited to chat with you and share some of my stories and lessons that I've learned in life through my extreme sports.
Great. Please tell us about your background and also what or who drove you to the world of snowkiting and kite surfing.
Well, that's a great question to start off with. You'll probably notice that I don't have an American accent, right? So I do come from the land down under from Australia. I was born and bred in Canberra, which is the Australian capital city. And I'm grateful to have had sporty parents. And they actually had a ski shop. And believe it or not, we have skiing in Australia. And they sold ski gear in the wintertime. And then they would have different sports in the summer times and other seasons. My dad loved to ski and he loved to sail. And so my brother and I had this amazing upbringing of getting to try all these new sports and to be able to, create a love of skiing in the winter and a love of sailing in the summer. So when I was about 19 or 20, I had this dream of going to Alaska where the big mountains are and you see all of the skiers and the snowboarders in the movies, heli skiing and coming down these big mountains. And that was my dream that I wanted to make happen. And I did get the chance to do that. And that trip changed my life in so many ways. At that point in time, I actually had bought a kite. It was one of the products I'd seen at a trade show that was new and upcoming in the late 90s. And I knew that I had to go and get some lessons to be safe at learning how to fly my kite. And the only place back then to get a lesson was in Hawaii. So I thought, well, I'll go to Alaska heli skiing, and on the way home, I can stop in Hawaii and have a lesson. So I actually had that kite with me, but didn't know how to use it. So what happened was I was up there and I had my dream come true of heli skiing up there. But I also learned that the weather doesn't always cooperate and the helicopter can't fly every day. The weather gets very stormy and it starts snowing and it gets very, very windy. And so I met one of the heli ski guides and he told me he was a windsurfer. And I grew up windsurfing, so we had something in common. And I told him that I had a kite and I was going to learn how to kiteboard. And he said, I've actually got a trainer kite with me too. Why don't we go out and try flying the kites together with our snowboards on and we'll see if we can get towed around, which sounded like a great idea at the time. And we went out there and it wasn't fully successful
Whoa.
this time, right? It was very
Uh-huh.
scary, but this heli ski guide was very cute. So I was being very brave, and maybe he
Mhm.
thought I was a little better than I was. But we put up these kites and we did get towed around. And that day is so memorable in my life because that was the day we pretty much discovered the sport of snow kiting, which was a combination of our snowboarding and sailing together in the snow, which was incredible. And that day we also fell in love with each other. And that heli ski guide is now my husband of 16 years. So
Oh.
I was going to ask that.
Oh.
What a
So
wonderful story.
that's a great beginning for your adventures in life and everything. Wow.
Oh, absolutely.
that trip
I have
changed
to
my
ask
life
you,
in so many ways.
Uh-huh.
yeah, I have to ask you, what does it feel like when you're flying on the mountains and water? What is the feeling?
Boy, Mary, that's a hard feeling to describe. And it's something that I've been doing for over 20 years, and it still gives me goosebumps just to think about it. It is a combination of sailing, as I mentioned. And then when I'm on the water, I'm riding my surfboard. When I'm on the mountain, I'm using my skis these days. I have done it on snowboard, and you can do it on both. But the feeling that I get is incredible. It's like I'm connected to Mother Nature. It's like I'm dancing with the wind. That's probably the best way to
Mm.
describe it is I'm dancing with the wind, and I feel such a connection to the wind and the weather. And that is something that I don't get in any of the other sports that I do.
Mm.
And kind of like being a bird, right?
It
Like
is.
I've never done anything like that, but that seems like I watch birds all the time. So, uh, can you tell us what are the steps that you learned the hard way and the fundamentals that you now teach?
Yes, that's also another great question because it's a sport that a lot of people look at and they think, boy, that must be really dangerous. And it's not if you take the right steps in the learning process. And so the first thing I'd recommend is to go and get a lesson. Find somebody like myself that is trained. Now, I'm a certified kiteboarding instructor with the IKO, the International Kiteboarding Organization, and also KA, which is Kiteboarding Australia. And I keep my certifications up. And we are taught the safest way to teach people how to fly a kite. And so in those first few lessons, we're teaching people all about the safety features of the kite and also the safety in making the right decision of should we go kiting today? Is it the right weather? Do we have the right wind speed? And I teach people the word flow. FLOW. And if you can remember flow, which is wind flow, we all want to be in flow, then that gives us the 4 steps before we even put our kite in the sky to make sure we're making those right decisions. So F stands for forecasting. We need to learn how to forecast the wind and weather. And if we watch the news, they tell us what temperature it's going to be and if it's going to rain, but they don't tell us a lot about wind. So we have to increase our knowledge of forecasting the wind and making a decision, is the wind going the right direction today? Is it going to be the right wind speed for our standard of kiting? If we're a beginner, we don't want to go in too strong
How
a
do,
winds, right?
yeah, how do you
Hmm.
do
So
that?
forecasting is a huge part. I've got some great weather apps on my phone. I use one I love to use called Windy, and that gives me some really good data from all of the weather stations around on how I can make a decision if which day of the week is going to be the best day for flying the kite, and then I can organize my whole work schedule and routine around that and book people in to come at the right time for learning. Now, the L in
Hmm.
flow stands for location. Again, you want to make sure you're flying at the right location. If you're at a location where there's a lot of trees and buildings around, that's a definite red flag. We want to make sure we're choosing a location that has clean wind flow and steady wind flow. And that's why certain locations around the world become known as kite or windsurfing spots to go. And we can choose those locations, but they also have to match the forecast. That's why we do the forecasting first and we see, is it a north wind or a south wind today? And sometimes some locations work better on different wind directions. So location is the second thing that we take into account to make sure that we're at a safe location for the right wind speed and direction. Then we've got O. O in flow stands for observations. So once we actually get to our location, we have to look around, be very observant, looking for any dangers. Are there trees? Are there buildings? Are there other people using or recreating in that area that we want to stay away from? You want to look upwind towards the wind. And is there anything upwind that's going to make turbulence in the wind? Is there a big building or a tree or a terrain feature that is going to affect our wind flow? And then we want to look downwind as well to see if we do get pulled that way. And when we're learning, we get pulled downwind to make sure we've got a big open area so that we're not going to run into something. So observation is very important. When we're in the mountain, that's something that backcountry skiers do a lot, is we're also observing the mountains to see, are there any signs of avalanches? Are there any dangers in the snowpack? So in our forecasting, we want to do avalanche forecasting. We want to do swell forecasting if we're in the waves. So if we're snow kiting on a frozen lake, we want to check the ice depth to make sure it's safe for us to go snow kiting on, that it will take our body weight, especially early season. So observations is super important for being safe. And the last one, the W, it stands for wind and weather. And wind and weather is something that we try to predict from the forecast, but forecasts aren't always correct, as we all know that. Weather guys do the best job they can, but sometimes the weather is unpredictable and the weather can change very quickly. And so it's important for us to be evaluating, is the wind what the forecast predicted? Or is it higher wind, lower wind? And is the wind going to be changing? So that if we saw on the forecast it's going to be perfect wind, but about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the wind's going to drop. We want to make sure we're not too far away from where we started. Otherwise, we're going to have to walk back a long way and we might have to rescue ourselves. So we want to be aware of what the wind and weather is doing at all times and being observant at the clouds. And that's my flow that I teach people.
So much to learn, so many factors.
Absolutely.
And that's what helped me even put up a kite in the sky. So
And have you worked with rank beginners or people who basically traverse on snow skis to get them to actually be able to fly on the snow and on the water? And also, how fast can you go?
Great questions, from one extreme of beginners to speed skiing at the other end of that scale. And the answer to that one, Mary, is that yes, I teach complete beginners. Although if you're wanting to snow kite and get towed around, the best thing to do is to go and learn your ski and snowboard skills at a resort. They have incredible ski schools where you can go and learn in a resort, and you can work your way up from the beginner green runs to the blue runs to the black runs, and you can work on that skill separately to the kite. The other skills we need is, of course, the kite skills, and that's where people come to me and I'll teach them to fly the kite. And then also we want to learn some backcountry skills, because when we're snow kiting, we're not in a ski resort. So all of a sudden we don't have ski patrollers to come and rescue us if something goes wrong. We have to rescue ourselves and our buddies that we're with. So we want to do some first aid training. We want to make sure we're carrying all our rescue gear in order to help somebody if they get hurt. So those are the 3 different skills we learn. But I had a lady that came up to Alaska. She couldn't ski, she couldn't snowboard, and she just wanted to learn how to fly a kite. And I took her out there, and I had this big padded mattress that she sat down on, and I taught her to fly a kite. And she was in her maybe mid 60s to late 60s. And that was just, she'd put it on her bucket list. And I watched her have extreme fear, and I watched her find the courage. And with my encouragement and the step-by-step lessons that I taught her, she had the biggest smile on her face, and she felt like she was so empowered by this wind power. And she was really out of her element when she started. So she was definitely an inspiration to all of us to get out there and try
Wow.
something.
I
Wow,
love
wow,
that.
wow.
And how fast on that last question can you go, or have you gone?
That's a great question. Now, my brother holds the world speed skiing record for a person with a disability. He's an amputee, so he actually goes
Oh,
fast on one leg, on one ski, and he went 213.68 kilometers an hour, which I believe is about
whoa.
135 miles an hour. So speed runs in my family. So just be aware that I'm not the norm. And so I have tried to go as fast as I can with a kite, and have definitely gone over 100 kilometers an hour. And that was very exhilarating. But as skiers,
Well,
and we tend to go fast.
Mm-hmm.
I gather that. I mean, the Summer
Yeah.
Olympics are out there, and of course the Winter Olympics. And I have to ask you, what is the Red Bull Ragnarok? Is that how you pronounce it? And what does it require?
So the Red Bull Ragnarok is one of the iconic snow kite competitions and races in the world. And it's based in Norway. And the race consists of 5 laps in 5 hours. And it's very much like sailing. They put markers, flags out, and you have to negotiate around the 5 flags and go as far as you can and as fast as you can in those 5 hours. But the difference between a sailing race and a snow kiting race is that it's not just flat water, and you can't see the flags. They might be over the top of 2 mountains. There might be one in the bottom of a valley. And so navigation is one of the important things that we need to learn when we're racing at the Ragnarok. Now, this race was so exciting. I did my research before I went, and I spoke to some ladies that had done the race before, and they said, Jen, this is going to be the hardest thing you ever do. Most people only complete 1 lap out of the 5, and they are exhausted, mentally and physically exhausted, and they're stoked just to finish 1 lap. But my goal was to go as far as I possibly could, and I trained really hard. Now, let me bump back 2 years. 2 years earlier, I was lying in a bed and I just had spinal surgery. They had done a spinal
Mm.
fusion of my L5 and S1. And I remember
Oh,
lying in bed, and I'd been dreaming of doing this Ragnarok race. And at that moment, I had no idea whether I would ever ski again, even walk again. And I
yeah.
remember thinking to myself, boy, if I could get back to my sport, I would love to do that race. And that was the motivation I needed in order to walk again. And I wasn't able to do no sport for 12 months. And I did a lot of PT, and I did all my exercises like we're supposed to. And so that was a pretty magic moment when I arrived at the start line at the Red Bull Ragnarok. There was a lot
And
of
I wanted
emotion.
to ask, where was it? Where
It was
was it
in
when you did
Norway.
that race?
It was in Norway,
Does
up
it
on the
move does it
plateau.
move around?
No,
Is it sometimes in different places?
they always have it in that
Always in
location.
Norway.
Yeah, because that is the location that has constant wind and good snow. So as I mentioned with our
Right.
sport, we need to be in a location that has good wind flow. And if you're going to run an event, and I help run some snow kite events in the world, I run one up in Alaska, we have to be in a location that has regular wind and that has good snow
Mm.
conditions. And so that particular
Mhm.
location, it is windy all the time. So I was at
In
the
your
start.
face, right?
Yeah, in your face.
Well,
You've got a helmet and goggles and a mask on.
Jenny, we know you came face to face with a charging polar bear. So tell us what happened. Where was that? What happened to you?
Boy, ladies, you like all the gory horror stories, don't you? Well,
Yeah,
that
Yes,
yeah.
that was
ma'am.
that was actually up in Alaska. Now, Alaska became my passionate place, as I mentioned, where I learned to snow kite and I met my husband. And I get to go up to Alaska for about 2 to 3 months every year. And polar bears was on my bucket list. I wanted to see a polar bear in the wild so badly. And I'd taken one trip up to a place called Barrow and gone out with a photographer who knew where the polar bears were. And on that particular trip, I had seen 70 polar bears. That's 70, if you miss my accent. 70 polar bears, mothers
Wow.
and
Wow.
twin cubs. And it was absolutely incredible. And that experience was meant so much to me. I was so grateful for that experience that over the next few days, I went to the local elementary school and I donated my time to go and speak to all the different classes and teach them about Australia, teach them about kangaroos, teach them about wind and flying kites. And after that initial experience of teaching kids in the school, I grew to enjoy that. And I got an offer one day to go up to a remote village in Alaska called Kaktovik. And up in Kaktovik, I was up there to teach at the school, again, to teach these kids how to fly kites, which was such a great opportunity. Now, Kaktovik is renowned for polar bear viewing. And in August every year, that's
Oh.
where all the photographers go to get those incredible photos that we see on National Geographic and things like that. And I was there in May. And when I arrived, that was the first thing I asked. Am I going to see a polar bear? I'm so excited. And I was wearing a hat with a polar bear on it, and I had a hoodie with a polar bear on it. I was totally manifesting to see a polar bear. But they told me this is the wrong time of year, Jen. You probably won't see one, but go inside any of the buildings and restaurants around here and you're going to see fantastic photos and learn about the bears. And so that's what I did. I started exploring the village. I started going in and reading all the posters, which said, if you see a bear, don't run, stand there with your hands in the air and make some noise. And I was asking all the kids at the school about their polar bear experiences because most of them had some incredible stories of opening the front door and there was a polar bear leaning against their front door and the polar bears being in their garage where their car's parked and polar bears coming up to their
Ooh.
bedroom window. And I was just fascinated with these stories, and to be honest, a little disappointed I wasn't going to get one of these experiences myself. But but we talk about
Big butt.
manifesting, and my manifestation must have been strong because one evening it was about 11 o'clock at night. We'd already had dinner and we decided we were going to go out for a walk and watch the sunset at midnight, which is, again, another experience that we don't get down in Australia. And we went out there. There was a group of 4 of us and we had a couple of dogs with us. And at the last second, one of them said, Jen, grab your kite. I want to see you fly your kite. I said, oh, great. I'll fly my kite at sunset. And I put up my kite and we weren't in a good location. Those guys chose the location and there were buildings upwind of me and the kite's going up and down and crashing. It wasn't making me look very good at that point in my kite skills. But the next thing I hear is one of them yell, bear, bear. And I look over and this polar bear is running directly towards me. Now, you can't really think. I forgot all the posters that I'd read. It all of a sudden, that natural reaction, that fight, flight, or freeze comes into play, and we just respond. So, as a kite lover, it was quite the coincidence that flight was my choice, and I turned around and I started running. And as I started running, I saw the other people I was with running as well, and thought, okay, we're all running, and I realized that I was the one at the back. I was the closest to the bear, which was
You
not
were
where
the
you want.
bait.
Yeah, they always say you don't want to be the slowest runner in the group. And I thought, oh, I'll never be the slowest runner. But in this particular situation, I was at the back. And as I was running, all of a sudden, I don't know what happened. I end up flat on my face. I'd fallen over. I tripped over something, and I am now on the ground. I get up and I look over to see where the bear was as I was getting up, and it is still charging directly at me. I had eye-to-eye contact with this bear, and I remember being so scared, and I remember the feet of the bear. When you see them run, their feet are all hairy and floppy, and this huge bear is just charging towards me. Now, it's not a little dot in the distance. This bear is getting really, really close at this stage. And by the time I stood up, I realized that the reason why I'd fell over is because I was wearing my safety leash. That kite was attached to me on a Velcro wrist leash so that if you let go of the kite, which I'd done, it doesn't blow away. But the wind was blowing one direction and I was trying to run the opposite direction, and it had been like an anchor and I just had fallen over. So I knew at that point that I needed to get that kite detached from my wrist. And at that point in time, I remember so clearly, oh boy, Jen, this could be it. This could be the end. And, you're about to be attacked by a polar bear. I was unable to put my hands in the air like you're supposed to, because all I was trying to do is get that Velcro undone on my wrist. And everything seemed to be in super slow motion. And as I'm trying to get that wrist leash off, the bear is now closer to me than my kite. And I know that my kite is about 20 meters away. I'm talking Aussie now in meters, but that is way too close. And my chances were nearly nothing. I didn't have a weapon. I had nothing to defend myself, and I just wanted to get that wrist leash off. The guy behind me had turned around and seen me fall over, and he started waving his arms and yelling, which was great, but I didn't even know he was there at the time. I was so focused on the bear. And the next thing I know, I get my leash off and I let go. And all of a sudden, the wind blew my kite away from me. The bear turned and chased the kite because the kite was moving and I was standing still. And so that day, I believed that my best friend, the wind, and my kite saved my life. And that gave me even more of a connection to the sport.
Oh, what a story. I have another one to ask about too. How did you get caught in an avalanche? I mean, that's really scary too. I mean, what are you learning from all of this?
Right. Well, if I'm talking to back stories about things that go wrong, it makes it seem like what I do is very dangerous. But that was a situation that really couldn't have been predicted or couldn't have been avoided. But I did learn that our kite being up in the sky, the bears can see it from a long distance and they're very curious. And with my research that I did after this experience, because I wanted to become a bit of a polar bear expert at that stage, and the polar bear became my spirit animal, I realized that it really didn't want to charge and eat me. It was just curious because it had seen this unusual kite flying around in the sky, and they as soon as it saw the kite move, it turned and chased the kite. And I feel so grateful that by the time Polar Bear Patrol got there, which are these guys that guard the village against polar bears, they ride a snowmobile and they have two guns in the back. And one has bullets and one is fireworks. And I'm so grateful as an animal lover that by the time it got there, it wasn't threatening my life, and they were able to fire fireworks at the bear and have it, out of the village. It scared it out of the village, which was amazing. Now, the avalanche incident, that was something that happened very early on in my big mountain skiing career. And avalanches are something that the avalanche professionals like my husband, the heli ski guides, are very, very good at predicting those avalanches. And there's certain signals and signs out there that they can read that others can't about where you should and shouldn't go. And that's why I mentioned if we're going to get into snow kiting or you're going to want to ski in the backcountry, it's important to do some avalanche courses. And they start teaching you about the snowpack and about what they call red flags. And red flags
Right.
is a danger. And if you observe one red flag, maybe we can mitigate that danger and avoid it. If all of a sudden you've got 2 or 3 red flags, then hey, it may not be the right day to go. But this was a bit of an unusual situation where I was out with a film crew. I was a photographer, and I got the chance to go out with some incredible athletes to take great photos for the magazines with them. And those guys decided that they'd go up to the mountain and they wanted to jump off this cornice. Now, anybody who's a skier or snowboard knows that cornices are dangerous, right? Cornices are formed from, my friend, the wind blowing snow over a ridgeline, and the snow sort of builds out over that ridgeline. And at some point, with some weight on top, that cornice can break. Now, in Alaska, everything's really big, and it's very difficult to get the scale of things. And these athletes that were up there were very overexcited about being filmed for the movies and the magazines. And they decided they wanted to jump off this cornice. And myself and another lady were down on the slope ready to take their photograph. But they didn't hike up far enough on the mountain, and they thought they were in the right spot. But when they walked out to the edge to have a look to see if they were in the right spot, I heard a big and the cornice broke. And this wasn't a little cornice. The best scale I can give you, or the analogy I can give you, is pretty much like 12 school buses parked in a line waiting to pick up kids at the school. That's how long and big this cornice was. And when it broke, that cornice came down and it hit the slope that I was on, and all of a sudden the whole slope starts moving. Now, to the credit of the heli-ski guide, who was my boyfriend at the time and now husband, he had put us in a spot on the mountain that saved our lives. And he put us on this little terrain feature that was sort of raised up so that when it avalanched, it all went around us. But my instant reaction when it broke and it's all moving around me was I needed to move. I needed to get out of there. And my natural reaction was to move to the left. And then I got caught in the moving snow and was taken down the mountain. And at this point, I'm not tumbling and being buried in the avalanche. It was a really, really sort of bizarre feeling because I felt like I was in a lawn chair. I was on top of the snow and the snow is just moving and sliding down the mountain. And I saw the pieces of snow coming to a stop above the cliff. And I was on one of those pieces of snow that came to a stop at the top of the cliff there. And that saved my life. The other girl next to me, her reaction was just to freeze. She didn't move. And that was the best thing she could have done because she didn't get caught in the avalanche. She just stayed in the one spot. But boy, there was a lot of trauma involved. She was very shaken up, and we needed to get her off the mountain after that. So that was an experience that we don't want to.
Well, wait. You weren't shaken up by riding a mountain in a lawn chair?
Yeah. Well, that sounds
you needed to get her off. You needed to get her off instead of you.
Kathy, I won't lie. I like to pretend I'm really brave and strong sometimes, but yes, there was a lot of fear and I was shaken up, but I was still on the mountain and I knew I needed to stay composed and get off the mountain, and I knew that dealing with the other lady was a higher priority than myself. This wasn't my first time being on a big mountain. I had been doing that for a couple of years, and I like to call it, I built up my fear tolerance a little bit. So the first time I dropped in on a big mountain, boy, that fear was huge, and I had to find the courage.
But what about the athletes that were up on the cornice?
Oh,
what happened to them?
Boy, did we slap them on the hand for putting us in that danger, but they were okay.
They were okay.
They jumped back and they stayed on top of the mountain and just watched it all happen. So those guys were okay. And my husband, who was down the mountain a little bit further, he saw it happen, and it was like a movie for him. The avalanche was coming at him, and he had to ride down as fast as he could to get out of the avalanche's path. So yeah, we all ended up okay, and we all learnt a lot that day, because we can learn things in a class in theory, but until you've experienced it in real life, that's when the real experience of learning comes into play. And it's an experience that I'm very grateful for. I'm grateful for the polar bear. I'm grateful for the avalanche, because that has given me so much knowledge and experience that I can now help other people when they're in scary situations and when they need to overcome fear as well, because maybe they haven't been in one of those situations before.
Can you also talk about how the extreme limits of wind, weather, and human factors affect our abilities?
Yes, and that's a great thing to talk about with using that avalanche as the example, because the human factor, that's where we get a little bit too excited sometimes, that we overlook those red flags or dangers, and it happens to all of us. And when we're doing our avalanche training classes, it's a whole subject on the human factor, and they say that it happens a lot more to men, but it's happened to me many times too. You can see I'm quite excitable, and we can get very excited about doing something. Maybe an example would be we're planning to go and ski a mountain on the weekend, and we plan it for a long time, and we had to get permission from our partners and our family to go, and we had to get time off work, and we've traveled a long way to get there. And so the desire to summit that mountain and have that experience is huge. Nothing's going to stop us, right? But if we get there and all of a sudden the conditions aren't quite right, ooh, maybe there's a sign of an avalanche over there, or maybe the temperature's not right, or the weather's not suitable, we may overlook those and go, oh no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Let's do it anyway. We'll be fine. And that is the human factor that gets us into trouble, that we overlook those dangers. And that's why observation and taking note of how many red flags you're seeing, and if you count 3, then, it's smart to say, hey, today is not the day to have that happen. So we need to take into account that human factor. We also need to take into account what is our skills and our experience level. So if we talk about kiting as an example, I mentioned if you're a beginner and you're just starting, you may want to go in a much smaller wind range. So we can only go in this much wind. If it's less than that, it won't be enough wind for us to fly the kite. And then if it gets too much wind, it's going to be dangerous there. So we have a very narrow range of wind that we can use. I love teaching people about our temperature range, and temperature is something we need to take into account as well when we're in cold environments like Alaska, Norway, Antarctica, Greenland. And a lot of us in this modern age, I'm sure we all do it, is we keep ourselves in a very narrow temperature range. If we get cold, we turn on a heater. If we get hot, we turn on the air conditioner. And we keep ourselves in this very narrow temperature range. And therefore, it doesn't take much for us to be outside our comfort zone, and we don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And so it's really important, maybe using temperature as an example, to expose ourselves to hotter temperatures. Go in a sauna, right? Expose ourselves to colder temperatures. Go in an ice bath, or maybe don't turn that heater on occasionally. And our bodies are incredible. Our bodies can do so much more than we realize, and our bodies will actually adapt and acclimatize, or acclimate, as the Americans say. And our bodies will actually get used to those temperatures that at first they feel uncomfortable. And after a while, we're able to feel comfortable in those colder temperatures. And so if we use that sort of analogy, we can use that in sport, in temperatures, in skills, in weather, of going outside our comfort zone. Even if you're in your own business, you ladies are very comfortable being live on video and chatting in public. But for a lot of people, that's really scary. That's outside of their comfort zone. And we need to do it sort of once, and we're going to feel very uncomfortable. But if we do it twice, we do it 3 times, we start practicing it, all of a sudden, we feel very comfortable in front of a camera or speaking in public, and we've expanded our comfort zone.
That's true. It gets a
Good.
little easier.
Good.
Although I don't know about Kathy, but I was very uncomfortable when we started the podcast. But now it's just such a delight to meet people like you. So I want to ask you. You've injured yourself a few times, and you recently underwent brain surgery. But as we mentioned before we came on, you were excited to get back in the water for the first time after your surgery with your kite. So, how do you maintain your great attitude? And how are you able to get up again to rebuild everything, to rebuild your life and to overcome fear?
Things go wrong sometimes, Mary. We all encounter things that go wrong, and some of them we can control our decisions, like I mentioned, to choose not to do the activity if the conditions aren't right. And then other times something just hits us out of the blue. And I already mentioned that I had spinal surgery in my 40s, and I was able to get back to kite surfing and back to snow kiting. And doing it that first time taught me that it's possible to get back. We need to look for some hope, look for an example. Has somebody else gotten back to sport after having back surgery? Yes, they have. And so I knew that it was possible if I took all the right steps to look after my body and train my body. And the same thing happened this year. In January, I'd been having headaches for about 5 months, and these headaches started getting very debilitating. I was spending a lot of hours in bed. I was unable to do anything, and the doctors really couldn't find out what was wrong with me. They kept giving me different medications for migraines and for meningitis and even morphine to try and help me with the pain of these headaches, but nothing was working. And I ended up advocating for myself because those doctors told me they'd done all the diagnostics that they could. They'd done the MRIs, they'd done spinal taps, they'd done everything they could. But I just knew something was wrong and we had to keep looking. So I took myself to the emergency department and said to the guy, look, this is an emergency. This is what's happening. I'm in extreme pain and nothing's working. There's got to be something wrong. What else can we do? Where can we look? And he realized that they hadn't done a CT scan of the back of my head. And when he did that in the first week of February this year, they found a brain aneurysm. He came back and he said to me, Jen, I think I found the cause of your headaches. You've got a brain aneurysm. And at the time, I didn't even know what a brain aneurysm was. But I was excited that they'd found something that could have been causing my headaches, which is what we're all looking for, is the reason why. And within a few days, I was seeing a neurosurgeon, Dr. Khan in Billings, and he did what's called an angiogram, another test that they do where they put contrast in your brain and they x-ray your whole brain. And he had told me the news that he'd found 3 brain aneurysms. And they were all
goodness.
Oh, I know. What a shock to the system. But the thing about it was that where those brain aneurysms were was exactly where I was getting the pain, one at the back of the neck, one behind my eye, and one over here on the side of my head. And so to me, we'd found the cause of these headaches. And he told me that the next steps were to have multiple brain surgeries in order to fix these aneurysms. But he made me realize just how lucky and grateful I should be that we found them before they ruptured, because the more research I did, the more I found out that most people have a stroke because the brain aneurysms burst. They have a stroke, and that's when they end up finding out that they've had one. So I was still pre-stroke. They hadn't ruptured, and I was in a very lucky place to be in, although they were very, very close to rupturing. And for a week while I was waiting for the surgery, I felt like they could burst at any second. And that was a very, very scary time in my life. That was actually scarier than being charged by a polar bear and scarier than being caught in an avalanche, because this was out of my control. And I felt like I could lose my life, and the dangers of the surgery were statistics I really didn't like. And one of the main things was that I was grieving. I was grieving my life. I was grieving the dreams of these adventures that I still had on my list that I wanted to achieve. And I was grieving the life I had with my husband, of us doing our sports together. And that was a really, really difficult time in my life that I had to figure out what mindset did I need, what were the tools that I could use that my extreme sports had taught me in order to deal with having multiple brain surgeries that were coming up.
And yet you made a comeback after a huge setback. How did you emotionally do that?
Well, I love that you used those two words, Mary, because they were my words too. I knew that I'd had a setback, and I realized that it was really important at this time to now lay back and to rest and let my body recover and recuperate, especially after those brain surgeries. The layback time was very difficult for someone like me who's so energetic and wanting to do everything. Relaxation and feeling like I was doing nothing was a difficult period. But then after the layback comes the comeback. And I was really looking forward to that comeback stage of being able to get back to just something little. And one of the things I did, which really gave me hope and so much joy, was I took the world's smallest kite into ICU. And after I was lying in ICU, I still had all of my drips in my arms, and I'm still hooked up to the machines beeping. I was able to fly a kite. And that one simple action of flying a kite, just waving it around my head, gave me so much joy and so much hope. And I had also done some research. Could I find somebody else who had had brain aneurysms and had had these surgeries? Were there people like me who were back skiing? Were there people back snow kiting? Were there people doing activities after these? And to be honest, I didn't find any for a long, long time. But I kept investigating, and finally I found a blog that was about 15 years old. And this blog was about a man who had had the brain aneurysm, had had the surgery, and he set himself the goal of skiing his local mountain, hiking to the top to the summit, and skiing back down. And as soon as I read that story, it gave me so much hope that maybe I can do that too. And that was all that I needed. And so the fourth step after setback, layback, and come back, and I've just gotten back to my kite surfing, and I'll get to snow kite in August, which will be super exciting, was the give back. And the give back for me is a really special thing that I'm doing, is giving back to the community, and I'm telling my story. And I'm so grateful to this podcast for me sharing my story, because maybe I can give somebody else who's experiencing this some hope that they can get back to their life too. And I've had the chance to go to some elementary schools and to teach them about wind. And we actually do kite making. All the kids make their own kites and decorate them. And that experience of giving back to my local community and giving joy to these children has been so rewarding to me. And having a mother come up to me after class and say, Jennie, I have to tell you a story. My daughter, I picked her up from school every day this week, and she has been in tears. She's having a really hard time in life and has been very depressed. But today I picked her up from school, and she ran up to the car with the biggest smile on her face, flying her kite. And she had so much joy. And just for that one story, to give that one child some joy, made everything that I was doing, it was just the right path that I was on. And so the give back stage has been so rewarding, not just to me, but to so many others.
And what is it about being outside in extreme weather that excites you and keeps you going? What is that?
Oh, I don't know about you ladies, but I feel that energy. There's so much energy in the air when the air is moving. Wind has a lot of power, and it has so much energy. I mean, now a lot of places are using wind power to create electricity for the whole towns, right? But when I go outside in what Mother Nature gives us, which is weather, some people, again, have that narrow comfort range. They only like sunny conditions with no wind, whereas I've expanded my wind range to love snowy storms when it's windy because I can go and fly my kite and ski. And I love cold temperatures because I'm expanding my
Amazing.
comfort zone, and it just makes me feel alive. It really does. So I embrace whatever
Wow.
weather Mother Nature gives me. I'll find something fun to do in it.
I
That's
love that.
great.
I feel
Yeah,
the
it's
same
great.
way when I ski. But I have to ask you, I want to pivot to another personal terrain here. You're the CEO of International Snow Kite Academy, and AdrenaJen, as you call yourself, has a pro
AdrenaJen.
shop for AdrenaJen. And please tell us how you got that name. I can only imagine. And you have a pro shop for students to buy kites. And you recently launched your snow kite adventure locations for snow kiting trips around the world. How does marketing and running a business tie in with flying kites?
Another great question. I love talking about being an entrepreneur, and my parents were entrepreneurs. So I've grown up with my parents having their own business. And so it's always been very natural
Mhm.
for me to start my own business. And when I immigrated to the United States and married my American husband, it was only natural for me to want to start a business. And once we started snow kiting up in Alaska on those stormy days when the helicopter couldn't fly, all of a sudden other people saw us having fun when the weather, they thought it was bad weather, and thought it was good weather because we were flying kites and getting towed around and having a good time. All of a sudden we had other people that wanted to learn. And so I started teaching other people to fly kites with their skis and snowboard on. And all of a sudden, this turned into a business. There was a market for it. You had all these
Mhm.
heli skiers who've gone up to Alaska to go in the helicopter, and all of a sudden the weather's not suitable to fly the helicopter, and they're sitting around either at the bar or, you know, they're frustrated because they're not doing what they want. And so
Mhm.
I have this market of people, extreme athletes, that want to come out snow kiting with me. And over the years, I've had Olympic athletes and superstars and so many other people, like-minded people like myself. And I've taken them out there and given them the thrill of flying a kite in the wind and the snow. And they just love that. So all of a sudden, I travel around a lot of different locations, and I found out that I could run a snow kite school in Montana, where my husband lives, in Idaho. There's a really good spot there that's windy and snowy. And Alaska, of course, I've mentioned. And back home in Australia. I'd go back home to Australia to visit my family, see my parents and my brother. And I was able to teach people in the backcountry there also how to fly kites and get towed around. But one of the things we do when we're starting a business is they always tell us we need to find our niche. Who's our niche? Who's our market? Who is the
Mhm.
right
Mhm.
person that we want to deal with? And part of my journey in learning how to kite, I'd had great success going to these women's retreats, these women's camps, and going for a weekend with a bunch of other ladies. And we can all be scared together, especially when you're learning. And we all overcome our fear together, and then we all get empowered together. And it was such an amazing
Hmm.
time in my life that got me into the sport. I wanted to give back as well. And so I created these women's 3-day retreats in multiple locations around the world. And I invited other women to come and learn with me. And it wasn't just about learning to fly kites. It was learning to overcome fear, to find courage, to dance with the wind. And at night we would tell inspirational stories and watch movies, and we would all eat together and go out every day and enjoy the windy, snowy weather. And I love watching these women go from being, I call it the scaredy cat phase, into being an absolute superhero at the end, feeling so empowered that they can do this sport that they dreamed of doing. And that's one of my favorite things to do, is teach these women's camps, which are incredible. So of course, when people learn to fly kites, next step is to buy your own. And so I have a pro shop, I have a website, and I sell these ladies. They start off with a trainer kite, which is very easy for us to fly. I even teach little kids about from the age of 7 or 8 to fly a trainer kite. And I teach ladies up to the age of 80. I've taught an 80-year-old. What an inspiration that was. And I sell them the right kite for their standard of kiting. And also I help them choose the right size kite for the location that they're going to be kiting in, so that they can safely progress in the sport, which is great. I also teach some online classes as well. I taught you guys the flow lesson
Mm-hmm.
about forecasting, location, observation, and wind. And so that's just the start of the theory behind snow kiting and flying a kite and kiteboarding. And the more theory we can learn, then when we actually go out to the location to fly our kites, we're already armed with that knowledge. And having that knowledge beforehand gives us more confidence when we start
Mm-hmm.
off. So I love doing those theory lessons as well, just to build people's confidence.
And Jennie, what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, I'm in this transitional phase, and a transition is the maneuver that we call it when we change directions with our kite. In sailing, they call it tacking or jibing. In kiting, we call it a transition. And I'm in this sort of pivoting phase because we talked about having brain surgery, and I've spent the last 5 months not being able to do my sport and not being able to teach people in the field and share my passion of wind and kites. And that's where I started teaching at the schools, which was a great way for me to continue sharing the lessons that I've learnt in life with those kids. That I've decided to write a children's book. And that book's nearly finished. And I'm so proud of this story, because this story is going to really share these lessons of how much joy you can get flying a kite, and how to find courage to go outside in the wind, and the lessons that we can learn in that. And I've written it in a children's book called Gale and the Red Kite of Courage. And in the back of the book, there's actually a kite making kit. So these kids are going to be able to read the book and then make their own kite and then go outside and fly this kite. And I'm so excited about that new chapter in my life as an author. And of course, I'm really enjoying getting to speak to people like your podcast and on stages to share my stories and teach these lessons of hope and inspiration and motivation to help empower people. So that is the next stage in my career. I'm still going to teach people how to fly kites in the water and on snow, but I'm adding now to my resume of ways that I can share my knowledge with others.
Oh, that's exciting. What would you like our audience to have as a takeaway today?
I would like the audience to have as a takeaway that fear is something we're all going to feel at any time, and whether it's something like going live on your Facebook, or the fear of having an injury and not knowing what your life will look like afterwards, to the fear of avalanches and polar bears. We'll all experience fear at some point in some situation, and it's nothing to run away from. Fear is something that we can face, and we can find courage. And if we add a little adrenaline to our fear, I like to call it the courage cocktail, a little bit of fear, a little bit of adrenaline. And that's why they call me AdrenaJen, because I'm always full of adrenaline. And that adrenaline is a natural response to a fear that actually keeps us aware and observant and takes us to safety, so that we make the right decisions to stay safe. So adrenaline is actually a safety tool as well. And if we can get excited about overcoming that fear and find the courage, boy, we can have some great adventures in life, and we can do some really amazing
Bravo.
things.
Yeah,
Bravo.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennie. Our guest today
Thank
on Late Boomers has been Jennie Milton, kite surfing and snow kiting champion and CEO of International Snow Kite Academy and Snow Kite Adventure Locations, and now author and speaker. You can reach Jennie to sign up for the Academy and learn more about her programs at AdrenaJen.com, and that's AdrenaJen. kitesurfing.com. Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful.
We want to thank our listeners for subscribing to our podcast and checking us out on YouTube and recommending us to your friends. We appreciate you, and we'd love to have you give us a 5-star review. And we want to hear about your experiences with late boomers and what gets you inspired. We are on Instagram at I am Kathy Worthington and at I am Mary Elkins and at Late Boomers. Thank you for listening. And thanks again, Jennie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Late Boomers, the podcast that is your guide to creating a third act with style, power, and impact. Please visit our website and get in touch with us at lateboomeers.biz. If you would like to listen to or download other episodes of Late Boomers, go to EWNpodcastnetwork.com.
This podcast is also available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and most other major podcast sites. We hope you make use of the wisdom you've gained here and that you enjoy a successful third act with your own style, power, and impact.